Hello and a warm welcome to another episode. My guest today is Geugelin, a very experienced revenue leader and former Chief Revenue Officer at Wonder Mobility. Now he's the co-founder at Pi, and together we dived into the reasons and root causes why so many scale-ups do not meet their revenue targets. What should be fixed and what can be done? Welcome, Roman. Great to have you.
Likewise. Hi, Björn. Great to see you.
So topic for today is we have in today's revenue organizations, we have one part who is desperately hoping to meet somehow targets for this year, or at least for the last quarter. And the other thing will sooner or later start preparing the business plan for next year. And we both know that reality looks kind of interesting because nearly no or very few scale-ups are meeting targets. Well, that's definitely a challenge and a problem, but what are the root causes and how can it be fixed?
Well, it's an excellent question. And ideally, I'd love for everyone who's listening today to have as an outcome that they have an idea of what they can do to improve the chances of actually hitting it next year, right? Like, because now we're looking at the real window and it looks a bit sad, but let's be better next time.
It will be. But before we do so because I totally messed up with introducing you properly. So who are you and what are you? What did you found?
Awesome. Yes, I'm Roman. I'm the co-founder of Pine. We have built a revenue platform that combines revenue planning with team steering to make sure that companies actually create plans that they can hit. Yeah. And our goal really is to help companies get from insights to fixing a problem faster than they ever did before, based on really giving that 360 overview about everything that's happening in your go-to-market strategy, right? And we are now 9 people to Pine companies based out of Berlin. We are invested by top-tier Global One investors. And yes, actually, my background is also as a revenue leader, right? Like I was CRO at different sizes of company, amongst other at Wonder Mobility. I basically guided them through the hyperscaling phase, went from just trying to find out anything that works to getting to something more predictable, right? Like really that path from 100K to double-digit million ARR or revenues back then. And back in the days, we really had gone through all the ups and downs of, overachieving targets and really struggling a bit more at some point because you just get more ambitious, things get more unpredictable at some point as well. Conversely, right? Because at the beginning, you are so much more chaotic and you just throw things at the wall. And then once you actually hit like 10, 15 people, it gets very difficult to keep an overview to really clearly plan what they are going to get out with. And then that's usually the point where you really have to get more scientific, a lot smarter about how you actually allocate your resources, how you identify and fix problems. And that's basically also why I have actually 2 different perspectives, right? On the one hand, the market and the problems that we are seeing across, like especially Series A, Series B, B2B SaaS Scaleups. And on the other hand, of having lived this myself and having gone through the overachievement and the struggle of actually, fighting with a revenue plan that's very ambitious. And then, basically having to face that same reality back then.
Perfect. So a true expert in his field. So let's dive into it. Why do so many scale-ups do not meet targets at all?
Yeah, I think there's a very provocative statistic that I discussed with Julius Gerda a few weeks back was actually that 9 out of 10 are actually not hitting their targets, right? And why that might be a bit ambitious, right? Like especially compared to last year, there was a study, I think 3 or 4 are missing their targets. But this year actually has exacerbated the situation a bit in the market. And I think to understand the root cause, we need to look at 2 things, right? The first one is we need to understand and really look closely at the market situation and how it has developed and what this new reality actually requires from company. And then in the second step, we will then see that the planning piece that scale-ups operate on and the operating cadence that they are working on doesn't really reflect this new market reality, right? They're still calculating with the classical triple, double acceleration metrics, basically, to get to the next funding rounds. And I think it's time to really think about what changed first and then to think about target setting and strategy execution in a different way. So maybe the first thing is the current situation in the SaaS market is like, we all know about the efficiency growth, like the push to efficient growth. And we know that Series A and B founders are actually preserving cash to kind of not raise on a discount, right? And especially if you're selling to SaaS as a SaaS company, like, I don't know, like, you actually work with quite some companies who are actually selling into B2B SaaS organizations as well, right? So I probably assume that you have the same experience, that buyers are a lot more frugal on how they spend their budgets this year because of exactly that reason, right? So it's kind of time to look for more internal optimizations if you are a Series A, Series B founder, right? Like, because right now the market just doesn't give you the same things anymore. You can't acquire customers for the same like. Performance marketing is getting so expensive. Outbound is getting a lot more difficult. It's getting a lot more expensive to acquire customers through the channel. And it's really time to understand which of your channel segments, customers, etc., are really throwing off the best return on investment, and really just doubling down on that, right? Like, really like nailing everything, like starting from your ICP towards which people you need and which functions you maybe don't need anymore. And this really requires a new level of granularity in everything around planning. It requires higher visibility into the revenue engine, and really a more scientific ways of looking at how you allocate resources across these different go-to-market functions throughout the year. So that's kind of the situation right now, right? Like, maybe also throwing it back to you, like, how does this actually match with the reality that you have been observing?
First of all, I like the separation between kind of external factors and internal factors, because I would definitely double down on the internal factors. The other thing, to be fair, looking, and this kind of merging a little bit with the external factors, for the last 5 years, it was relatively easy to sell even kind of a nice to have product into the market. So companies were growing, there was budget, there was kind of budget for experimentation, even in Europe. It was like it was. And now the kind of the reality in, do we really have a strong value proposition? Do we provide value? Can we prove it actually? Is becoming more, I would say, it's kind of real business. And therefore, I'm super, super happy whether you call it double down on segmentation, work on RevOps, all the buzzwords flying around. The core message is we need to find ways to grow more efficiently. And I'm super, super happy to dive into more details. So what can be actually done, which is in your own power and influence, to create a business plan which has a much, much higher chance to get met.
I love that point, actually, right? Like, this is something that I actually omitted, right? And you are super right. Like, good to have products are not really cutting it right now anymore. You really need to have like you need to fix a real pain. And this is like one important factor that I actually omitted. That's completely right. And yeah, you're right. Like, how can you set up an organization that can, react, that way you can react fast, where you can really change quickly, and where you can really be very deliberate of how you actually change to changing market conditions, or just based on changing market condition, right? So what you just mentioned is like, hey, customers that you acquired like 2 years ago, they might not be profitable anymore, right? Like, it's just a fact. Like, you need to reevaluate it. Like, probably half of your acquisition channels that you had like 1.5 years ago are not sustainable anymore, right? Like, you might, have to change a lot of these things. And if you are slow to react, you are fast to run out of money. Like, I think that's kind of the relationship that we're seeing here.
And I think this is a strong statement which shouldn't be overlooked, because every kind of experimentation or hitting in the wrong direction or not building up an efficient go-to-market motion will cost you double, because the cost of external financing kind of went through the roof, and it won't change overnight. And the other thing, what you also described, is if I reduce on cost, I will probably slow down my revenue or growth engine, which is not helping either for scale-ups. And I'm super optimistic that we will find smarter ways to get this sweet spot in still growing, but in a much more efficient and aligned way.
And that's the point. I think that's a very good point. They should, right? Like, it's completely merited that they have to be more efficient. The thing is, the plans that you are pushing through an investment side Like usually that's how it starts, right? Like you get that very high top level goal because you want to triple your revenue. And then you are in a problem. Like, how are you going to do a more efficient company while you triple your revenue? It's just conflicting goals, right? And I think that's where it starts, right? Like, this is what really good companies actually are able to do. They're able to push back on these targets. They are able to actually provide bottom-up estimations about what should be the target, what is realistic, what can we actually achieve. And then you have a significantly better chance of actually reaching those targets on the growth side, but also on the efficiency side alike.
Couldn't agree more. And I would say let's dive into more details because I know that we are both a huge fan of revenue data models. Let's start with the basics. So I give you one is kind of the volume or the funnel volume metrics to distinguish between what is happening on the new business side and what is happening on the existing revenue side. But happy to, you are the true expert in the room. So please let us dive a little bit into what should be understood by everyone in the company to really build up a revenue model which is working and not just coming through financial planning and or investors who have a wishful thinking.
Yeah, great question. I think actually setting up your revenue data model, right? Like it's one of those steps for sure. Like at the end of the day, like maybe taking a little step back, I think if you want to create one of the 10 companies that actually hits or beats the targets, right? If you want to be one of the outlier companies in this market, you actually have to, first of all, create radical transparency, right? Like otherwise it doesn't work. And there's transparency, there's different layers of transparency. I think the first one is what you just described, right? Like having a shared revenue data model that everybody understands, like really having full funnel visibility. Often, the kind of left side of the bow tie, which is like the sales funnel, is very well understood. The right one is actually a bit of a black box in a lot of companies, right? Like it's like, yeah, we don't have a churn problem. Yes, you do. Like you just don't know it. That's often happening. And this is,
if I may, sorry to interrupt, totally supported on the right-hand side, but even on the left-hand side. So kind of demand gen is another huge topic. So that understanding, so what is actually driving pipeline, what is actually driving pipeline with decent customer acquisition costs, it's all kind of, it needs to be aligned with aligned KPIs and an overall overarching revenue model.
Exactly. And you have to define this together with the team, right? Like with and usually it sounds very obvious. And I think most companies have some way, like some sort of doing this, right? Like they have some understanding of what an MQL is, what an SQL is, etc. But to really have this in an aligned way, like making sure, like, hey, first of all, the person who best knows about how the MQL definition is, they define it. We align the entire team with how it actually is defined. And then you have all of these volume metrics clear, right? And not only on the left side of the funnel, but also on the right side of the funnel, ideally. So you know how you define retention, expansion, downsell, etc. Right? And once you have that, that's the first step. The second step is once you have defined these metrics, you can easily get the conversion metrics in the middle, right? Like conversion rates, cycle times, like ACVs. This is the second layer that kind of evolves out of the first one. You have to have clear definitions and then clear owners for each of these KPIs. I would say that's the first step if you actually want to get to some sort of predictability for your engine.
All right. So then let's jump into step number 2.
The second step, in my experience, is something that companies, especially after like Series A, really need, right? I think before it might be a bit debatable. I actually don't think it makes so much sense, but a bottom-up revenue plan to really complement your top-down plan, right? Like especially now, let's say you have that perfect revenue data models of yours, right? You need to make sure that your plan is actually done in the same granularity as you have done the revenue tracking that you have implemented or the revenue model, right? So very concretely, that means, like for each of the metrics that you have defined and that you want to steer your team by, you basically have to define what metrics you want to hit in terms of target, right? Like revenue, like how much revenue do you want to make, and in terms of pipeline. Yeah. So basically you say, hey, these are my 4 different metrics that I want to plan for, 6 different metrics in terms of volume. These are the owners. Then we have the processing metrics. These are the owners for these processing metrics. Now we have like a few dimensions that we want to break it down to by channel, by geography, by product, for instance. And now you basically create a target plan and a pipeline plan, right? Do this bottom up, use historical conversion rates, like look really what are the dynamics of your segments or of your dimensions that you're breaking down. Do inbound leads convert faster, have smaller ACVs, but convert better than outbound leads, right? Like outbound leads should probably be bigger. Like how about partner leads? They should probably have the biggest conversion rates, but do you have some cutoff on them?
Are they scalable? Yeah.
Exactly, it's more scalable. That's also right. And at the other hand, like once you have done that, then it's all a matter of, okay, how can we make sure that we plan, first of all, in a predictive manner, somewhat predictive manner? How can we avoid some major mistakes that are usually done? And how can we make sure everybody understands the plan? How can we make sure everybody actually contributes who should be contributing so that we can actually live the plan afterwards?
I love that. And then it's, if you kind of match this bottom-up plan with the existing numbers and even kind of have some decent or realistic improvement rate in conversion, ACV, etc., you will probably discover a gap, which is then debatable. What can be done to fix the gap? Normally, it means more resources and or more time. But this is kind of like you were saying in the beginning, to have this informed dialogue with the founder team, with the investor team, and the reality. So how can we align these two perspectives and plans?
And it's an amazing place to have a conversation, right? Like this is exactly what you want to talk about, because all too often you see scenarios where this conversation doesn't happen. You just have the top-down plan. Hey guys, next year, 9 million. And then everybody's kind of like, man, like, I don't think we're going to reach it, but you already communicated it. So let's just all nod and like pretend like we're going to hit it. And what happens, right? Like 6 months later, everybody's frustrated. You actually have to let go of the head of marketing because it didn't generate enough leads. And like, you have to communicate that to investors, like just do it right at the beginning, build this conversation starter with a bottom-up plan, say what's realistic, right? And then negotiate the gap away. Like say, hey, in order to like, exactly what you said, like you basically build scenarios. Hey, if you give me that money, if you give me 2 million more, let's say 500K, I can hire 2 more SDRs and actually get to, or 3 more SDRs, whatever it is, and get to this gap that we're seeing in lead gen for EMEA, for instance, right?
Yeah. And what helped me, because I've also done it a few times, is to line every stakeholder in every department into this process. Because, for example, I was in hyper growth, and of course, a crucial factor was hiring. So if HR is not buying into this plan and we are short in terms of hiring for a quarter, it's entirely unrealistic to meet targets. So it's not just happening that out of a sudden my existing reps are kind of performing 300, 500% in quota attainment. It's not going to happen. So I see you smiling. So the same with kind of lead gen. If you have kind of this year, marketing has delivered X% of pipeline and or closed deals, and you kind of would like to scale it next year, you need a proper buy-in. Is this reasonable? Is this feasible? Bearing the budget in mind. So it sounds pretty easy, but I'm super curious. Why is it still so broken?
I mean, it's like, that's a very good example. I'd actually love to dive a bit more deeper into those in a second and just like hear your experiences also with what has gone wrong, right? Like what are the things that actually went wrong? So why is it so difficult? The reason is often this process it starts often structurally, right? Like you have this top-down goal, and then the CEO tells the VP finance, hey, let's create like a top-down plan based on some back of the napkins win rate, and let's allocate it to, the different dimensions that we care about, or the different revenue streams, what divided by the headcount, and voila, we go, right? And it's so detached from reality, right? This is where it starts. Like, this is where it actually starts. It needs to be founded in reality. You need to have some counterbalance. What you mentioned, like you have to have some discussion between the dream and the reality, Why is it so difficult? First of all, because involving so many people and aligning people is difficult, right? Like it's just so much easier to just say, hey, this is exactly, you just push it on the organization. 9 million it is, like from the pipeline, 60% come from marketing, let's go,
Yeah.
And And scale-ups are in a hurry. They don't have time, but they should really take time, and they should have someone who owns it, who's very close to go to market, right? And then it's a lot of project management, a lot of stakeholder management, and to be very clear, like also something that you mentioned. Why is it so difficult? What actually goes wrong? Just very simple human errors, right? Like, I would be very curious to hear your perspective on this as well, because there's always the same things that I see in plans. Like, it's, this very like averaged out conversion rates, for instance, right? Like, you basically blend everything and then suddenly nothing is actually representative anymore. So when you execute against it, how are you going to know what's off? Like, if you say, hey, my conversion rates are 20% lower than they are supposed to be, how do you know what exactly caused that? Like, it's every time an attack analysis until you actually learn to plan individually for all of these dimensions so you can see where the biggest gaps are, right? Or another classic is like, the assumptions that you make about hiring, like, they have to be backed by something. Like, why do you think you can suddenly hire in 2 months instead of 4 months? Like, is there a reason for that? Like, what is actually the initiative behind that? Are we hiring a super senior VP recruiting, or like, are we suddenly implementing systems that can automate it? Do we have more budget for actually working with external recruiters? Like, these type of things are often not covered. But I would be very curious to also hear your perspective. Like, what do you actually believe are the major reasons or the major mistakes that companies are doing in this planning process?
So yeah, like you were saying, definitely it's time, but that's overall arguable. If this is a kind of a proper argument that we do not have time. On the other hand, I still have the feeling that this kind of intersection between how do marketing, sales, customer success, and product play together, it's super tough to build up with an advanced Excel sheet, from the finance perspective. And as soon as you dive into just drafting your business plan with 2 segments, it gets messy quite quickly. And I'm not talking about average versus median. I'm talking about kind of SMB versus enterprise. And the deviation, whether you have 20% more SMB revenue contribution or enterprise revenue, out of 10 is blowing up the entire model.
It kind of brings us back to the name of this podcast, right? Like, it's the symphony, like, you kind of have to orchestrate it. Otherwise, it doesn't work, like, there's a trumpet and there's a trombone, and they are supposed to make different notes, like, it's not the same notes, so don't treat them as the same notes.
So let's become a little bit more pragmatic, because there's definitely hope at the end of the funnel. So what are kind of some proven systems, cadences, working operating principles to help our listeners to, okay, let's do it at least a little bit better or significantly better next year or during the planning for next year?
Okay, very simply spoken, right? Like, it's just if you are post Series A, do a bottom-up plan to complement the finance-led top-down plan. Yeah. So then what you mentioned is definitely in this bottom-up plan, have stakeholder buy-in from the contributor to that plan. Like, if you allocate certain lead gen targets, actually make sure that people understand them and buy in. Otherwise, they won't do it, right? If you have assumptions for why you can increase KPIs over the year, please give like some backing for these assumptions, attach some initiatives so you can attach some budget and make an argumentation so you can lead this conversation, right? Also some technical things like, take care of unintended compound, like of, just increasing everything by 2%, right? Like, just make sure that you're actually very, very diligent on planning these things out. Don't just plan for target, but also plan for pipeline, right? So like, think about how many leads do you expect in each different stage of your funnel across all dimensions over the year. So you can actually steer for it. Only what you can plan for, like what you plan for actually gets measured over the year. Also, one thing I often see is like, hey, seasonality. If you plan for seasonality, don't push everything in quarter 4. It's not going to happen, right? Like, it's the classic, like the first quarter, you probably can plan well for, the second one, maybe as well. And then things really go bad in quarter 4. Like, I think this is just have a bit of frugality. In terms of how you should, like, once you actually have that plan, ideally it's the same structure that you have for your revenue operating cadence, right? Like, look at the same KPIs every week. Like, hey, how is your actual performing against your plan, against your forecast, right? And always look at the same revenue data model. Like, if you define a funnel of 10 volume metrics, if you define who actually owns those, and then you did the same for all your processing metrics, just make sure that you always report on the same KPIs. So people actually are held accountable for making sure these KPIs are clean, that they actually are progressing towards the goals, and that you can really understand on a week-to-week basis where the problems are, and not just in an ad hoc analysis at the end of the quarter because the investors asked for it. Yeah. So I would say those are the most important things. And maybe one last thing that I would add here is every time you realize something is off track, and the faster you can realize this, the better, right? Like this is what I mentioned. Don't do it quarterly, do it weekly, monthly, latest. Yeah. You should be creating a new initiative, ideally, to close that gap, right? Like if you have something that's significantly, like it has a red light, in your system of, hey, how you're doing against your plan with your actuals and how your forecast is going to look like, then act on it. Assign an owner to that initiative and then track how it is performing. And I guarantee you, if you do this on a week-to-week basis, you will get a little bit better every week, and then you will probably hit target, or at least you can communicate very well why things haven't been working, and don't just have to say, yeah, the market was bad.
What I really like about this is, so whether you call it kind of the symphony which is playing together, or it's kind of a muscle or muscles you're building. So this kind of process of agile tracking, observing, analyzing, and then initiating a new campaign or any kind of initiative, this is kind of that flywheel which is improving the entire organization. So it's much more realistic to hit targets and to improve the foundation on your revenue model without the existing, this is coming top down and we try our very best to make it happen.
I love that, actually, because I think it's in stark contrast to how this is done a lot of times today. It's not thought in a flywheel, but rather like a waterfall, like you plan once and then you kind of close your eyes and hope you're going to hit it, and it's that you should make it agile, you should actually go in circles and plan, observe. Once you identify gaps, actually plan how you can close them again, set up initiatives and see whether they are working, and then keep iterating, like just go in circles all the time.
Great. So let's wrap it up really brief to become better instantly. So first of all, you need to set up your revenue data model. We talked about the different dimensions in more detail. Both of us are a big fan of the bow tie model. Then step number 2 is create a bottom-up plan, the revenue plan with all the dimensions that you have taking an informed part in challenging the financial planning, because this is where the real magic happens. And third component would be how to get it into motion, how to have these kind of very agile sprints, analysis the solid data foundation, then see, okay, where is the deviation between forecast and reality coming from, and then initiate campaigns and initiatives to get better every second or every rhythm you are in. Is there anything to add?
No, I think that's very accurate. And maybe one last thought that I have here, if you do that, like what I often see is, you're not on track, and then you just increase the target for the next quarter and you just work a bit harder, like get away from that, like become more evidence-based, become more scientific about it, because otherwise people are going to burn through, it's so frustrating if you can't achieve your target and everybody knows it.
So that's the perfect ending. And I have a personal question at the very end. I started asking everyone at the show. So what are you, Roman, learning today which you do not master yet?
Good question. Wow. So the one thing is certainly playing e-guitar. Like I used to dabble with it a while back, like when I was at university, but I never have really gotten well. And my wife at home always like as soon as I plug in, like the time I got it, she was excited. Wow, now we are gonna have concerts at home. And now every time I pick it up, she gets like slightly, it's a scary moment
irritated
for her. Yes, exactly. So I think that's definitely one thing. When I try to play Guns N' Roses solo at home on full volume, that's definitely something I haven't mastered yet.
All right. So all the best for that. It was a pleasure having you around. It was so short while. We could have gone for hours. So let's do that again, and have a wonderful day, Roman.
Likewise, Björn. Goodbye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.